This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.
And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to dive into some news. We're going to cover Trump. We're going to also cover a little bit this about rail traffic depression, kind of pointing towards the problems we're having with our economy right now. I got another one from Foundation for Economic Education from Jeffrey Tucker. This one's more of on the culture side, how to find joy in an unfree world, and also got a couple from Reason.com that we're going to cover here at the beginning of the broadcast. But first, I wanted to dive into a Ron Paul Liberty Report. Mythbusters, here comes the debt king. So we'll go ahead and dive into that first, and then we'll get into some of this. We'll start off with Trump's economic plan. Higher taxes, higher inflation, and higher minimum wage. So let's go ahead and dive into this Liberty Report first.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. Today is the day we do Mythbusters. The co-host is Chris Rossini. He is also the editor of the LibertyReport.com. Chris, welcome to the program today.
Great to be with you, Dr. Paul. Good morning.
Do you have any myths that we should discuss?
Yes, we're going to tackle debt today, and the presidential candidate who calls himself the king of debt. It's very prophetic that someone who loves debt so much, as he says, wants to be the president of a country that's virtually bankrupt. And he knows that it's a bad situation, but he also touts his negotiating skills, and he says, well, we just may have to renegotiate the debt or discount the debt. However, Dr. Paul, that's already common practice. They discount the debt every single day without renegotiating. The creditors are already, they get stiffed every day. So please talk about how it's already common policy to discount the U.S. national debt.
Well, this is certainly the case. The decrease in the real debt occurs constantly because we constantly devalue our currency. And of course, then we resort to blaming everybody else for manipulating their currency. But our job in managing the worldwide currency, the reserve currency, gives us a lot of leverage. The average country can't get away with this, but we can. We can discount the debt by literally printing money. Not only is it automatic, but it's never enough. Our Federal Reserve and our government wants to discount faster by having more inflation. They're not satisfied with 1.8 or 2%, but even though we're quite convinced there's more than that. But they want a lot more, and when we do get a lot more, they're going to be unhappy with it. So they want to continue the discounting of the debt, the real debt. But Trump argues the case that he can compare this to what he has done in business. And he's not bashful about it. He says, well, he had these businesses, he ran up the debt, and they had to renegotiate with them. So if he was paying 6, 7, 8% maybe for some of those projects, and he wouldn't necessarily back off and borrow less, he'd borrow more. Because then he said it was no big deal, to renegotiate, and he could make millions of dollars in a short period of time. Well, a country can't do that, for one thing. You can't renegotiate as if you're a private person doing this. Now, there are a few people left in the world today that think that bankruptcy is not an ethical thing to do. But it certainly is legal in this country to do it, and people have to resort to it. But there's a lot of people who don't do this. But to use this as a deliberate policy and think that you can translate that into a policy for the government, I think what he's thinking that he can do is the same thing, that if we have a lot of debt and we owe the Chinese, because we're going to make the Chinese pay, and we owe them $1.3 trillion, and the average interest rate might be 4%, then he's going to renegotiate and take those bonds in and say, okay, we're going to give you bonds and we're going to pay you 1%. Well, there's an ongoing process. New debt can be lower, but he can't renegotiate old debt. But I think that was knocked down rather quickly by just about every economist in the world to say that is not going to happen. But Trump was very emphatic about not allowing interest rates to go up, because that would be a bigger problem. Of course, from our viewpoint, the government shouldn't be in the business of fixing interest rates. Interest rates should, be set by the market. And obviously, if we allowed the market to operate and the Fed couldn't buy debt and couldn't do QE, which is the process whereby they discount debt, if they couldn't do that, interest rates probably would go up. They would have to depend on savings, and there would be a lot of complaints about that, and a lot of people would suffer from the overextension. But to continue this, because it seems to be working, and we have this edge with issuing the reserve currency of the world, isn't a reason to do it. It's not a good excuse. Matter of fact, all that does is extend even further the disconnect between real value and pretend value, and the malinvestment and the overinvestment. It continues to create these bubbles that even on the short run seem to be okay, because the process seems to be working for Wall Street fairly well. But we have two parts of our country right now. We have the lower middle class and the poor who are suffering and aren't benefiting, where the other half are. But see, this will come to an end. But the thought of discounting debt and renegotiating with countries, that will not work. Eventually, though, something will have to happen, and it's an ongoing process. So we're already in the business of discounting debt, and I think that'll continue for a while longer until some big economic or foreign policy event comes and just makes the announcement. The ball game is over, and there are days when I keep thinking it's getting closer and closer to that event, which will not go unnoticed.
Yes, it's a shame that it must be a part of human nature that you have to wait for a catastrophe in order to change, that you don't head it off before that, but we're doing the best we can here. We're going to stick with Donald Trump, and another major error he made, he basically took all of monetary history and tossed it aside. The ability and the desire for governments to just print money at will is not anything new. This is not the United States is not the first to do it, and the failure rate is a pure 100%. All of these experiments have always failed throughout history. So Donald Trump says that the U.S. will never, quote, never default, because they could just print the money. Now, does supply and demand not apply to the dollar, Dr. Paul?
Well, obviously it does, but they don't want to admit this. And this is obviously a myth that you can solve this problem by just printing money, because that is defaulting. And it's a wicked default because it's sinister, and the victims are real victims, and they don't quite realize what's happening, and they usually demand more government spending and more debt, but the real victims are the ones who end up with the inflation. But there have been direct defaults in our history. I mean, deliberate defaults. Even in revolutionary time, our original government had to default on the continental dollar. And then in the Civil War, we defaulted on the gold standard, and people got stiffed, and they got greenbacks. But fortunately, back then, there was still respect for the gold standard, and they went back on the gold standard, but they went through this default. But then Roosevelt did it too. You know, it was a default when our government admitted we are broke, we don't have the gold, and we don't want people to have gold because of distortion. We took away the right of people to own gold. And in 71, we went on a default internationally because Americans no longer could claim gold, but foreigners could. So we were trying to maintain stability by guaranteeing that our dollar was good as gold at $35 an ounce, but we kept printing money. So we were defaulting all along. So when we do that, this is a literal default, and yet the default is the constant inflation of the money supply, which devalues the currency. And this is the way the bills will be paid. Governments generally do not default by not sending out the checks. Now, there's been hints and rumors that some of the policies might be where they will cut back on Social Security payments and pension funds. They're not going to do that. If all of a sudden somebody said, well, we're in big debt, we've overextended ourselves, the bank account is empty, so we're going to cut a literal nominal cut in Social Security benefits. That is not the way it's going to occur. That would cause a revolution overnight. So it has to be a more sinister. But the planners have been fooled into thinking that it will be automatic. Just, print the money and it's going to respond exactly as we want it to. It'll stimulate the economy, prices will go up, the value of the dollar goes down, and real debt will go down. Well, it works that way sometimes, but sometimes it takes a while longer. And our government now sets this goal at 2%, and they're annoyed. They would take 3, 4, 5. So it's a deliberate policy of our government to default. And they can get away with this more than other countries because we issue the reserve currency of the world. This has been a tremendous advantage to us, and yet we have individuals who want to blame the other countries for it. We want to blame China for manipulating their currency and all these things. But when we can issue the currency that people will use and take, we can export our inflation. So the inflation, when the money goes out of the country, there's less money bidding up the prices and causing penalty on our people. So we send the money to China. It encourages our businesses to go to China, cheaper labor, and then we get the products back and they take our money. So we're inflating their system, which becomes very vulnerable. And then when the signs there are that it's not sustainable, then the natural forces of free markets come in and they say we have to have an adjustment. We have to go back to deflating the prices and trying to liquidate the debt and liquidating all the monetary inflation. So what do there? They lower their prices, so they export their deflation to the United States. We exported our inflation to them. They are exporting and we're importing their deflation because prices are actually going down. It makes it harder for our companies to compete. It's all a consequence of the nonsense, the greatest myth that has existed in monetary history ever has been the myth that fiat currency is a sound economic system. And they're playing games, they're playing with fire. It is so grossly distorted right now, and it's just amazing that it's being held together with a string. And one day that's going to change, and there will be a true devaluation, and there will be an absolute need for monetary reform, because the system we have today has never worked in the past, but it's bigger and worse than ever before, because the whole world is engulfed with this fiat system, and we are the managers of that. So it's going to be very hard for the monetary historians to say, well, it was all somebody else's fault. No, it was the managers of this currency. And we've had a free ride because we have been very rich. We still have a lot of wealth compared to others. We have a powerful military force. And this helps, put emphasis on the monetary system. They tend to trust the money longer than they should, because there is a subjectivity to trust and pricing. So this has been going on a long time. The average smaller country can't get away with this, and we have been able to do this, but it will come to an end, and there will be a default. Believe me, the default will be that everybody's going to get paid off, and the money's not going to be worth much, and we are going to see many, many people suffer from this, and it will absolutely require monetary reform. Hopefully, we in this country could lead that reform, but right now we're leading the deform. We're leading it in the wrong direction, because we are the principal culprit in destroying the monetary system, because we issue the reserve currency of the world, and we have done a lousy job.
Yes. Next, Dr. Paul, you were on the major networks a few times this week, and I really enjoyed one of your appearances where you actually had the opportunity to talk about the myth of the two-party system, how both philosophically and in practice the Republicans and Democrats are, interchangeable. One side wears red ties, the other side wears blue ties. That's about the only difference. And you also accurately pointed out, and this ruffled some feathers, that maybe it's not automatic that Hillary Clinton would be 10 times, 100 times worse than Donald Trump, even though that's a popular opinion. So please discuss this myth of the two parties, and I know you have a great chart to put up too.
Yes, and I think if people accept this myth that there's not a whole lot of difference, which many of us have followed for a long time, they also have to admit that the difference between the concerns about the election, the arguments on the election, and this is the biggest election in the world. We get this guy or this person, one back and forth. It's going to make all the difference in the world in elections. Just think how long this particular election is going on, because they have no answers to the disaster that we're facing. It goes back and forth. It becomes personalized. But the real myth is that the election process is important, where they ignore the significance of monetary policy, tax policy, income tax, over-regulations, foreign policy, all the things that reflect what people think the role of government ought to be. That is not dealt with. It becomes personalized and ugly, and never dealing with the subject. Now, I read something this morning that I thought was interesting. Yesterday, there was a vote in the Senate on the water bill. And the president sent a bill over there, and the Republicans running the Senate increased the bill by $261 billion. And they said that they needed the money. And Heritage put out the press release, and this was a victory for the Republicans, because this year they want to pass every single appropriation bill, which is about 13 of them, and they never get them done. They always have an omnibus bill at the end of the year, but it's different. They're going to be organized. So they called this, Heritage called this a victory for the Republicans by being able to raise Obama's bill for energy and water by $260 billion. And that's where we are today. So this is why people shouldn't be too optimistic or concerned that there's going to be a big difference between the Republicans and Democrats. And I'd like to put up a chart that demonstrates this to a bit. On here, this shows how much federal outlays per capita in the last several decades, back to 1945. But take a look in the middle there on Reagan, and also under George W. Bush. That is where you see the most significant increase in the amount of spending per capita. And Obama, it's actually done. Who would have believed it? who would have believed it was flat under Clinton? So it's just a myth, a total myth, that Republicans are conservatives and liberals are the big spenders. I think they're all the same because because the Republicans admit they're not fiscal conservatives when it comes to foreign spending and foreign wars. Well, we have to save the country. That's why we have to be in the Middle East. We have to fight these wars. We have to do all these things. And the people say, yeah, this is important to have national defense. Of course it is. But to destroy our country financially and overemphasize some of our dangers, that's hardly a way to do it. But it is indeed a major myth to think that all of a sudden that there's a big difference between the two. The thing that they forget about is how government operates. It doesn't operate with a democracy of the Congress and how they vote. There's the special people in Congress, the people in leadership are always backed by and financed by those individuals we call the deep state, the shadow government. And they're the ones who may not operate as a monolith, but as a group. They are able to harness democracy, so to speak, where if there's enough money put on pressure, Republicans and Democrat leadership, they get what they want. The best example in that would be the military-industrial complex, but everything else is that way. The water program, everybody has to vote for that. The farm program, they get together, and it's not one party over the other, because the people who know how to lobby for power, there's a real contest there, but it's not a philosophic contest of fiscal conservatives and fiscal liberalism or peace versus war. It's over power, and it has over the individuals who want to pass out the largesse. That's where the contest is. So the real contest is outside of Washington, and the people have to decide what the role of government ought to be, and they have to wake up to the fact that this whole thing is not dependent on this election. This is a distraction. It's a distraction from the shadow government. It's a distraction from the deep state where the real power is and where the determinations are made. And they sort of play on the democracy. Oh yeah. Of course, our founders hated democracy because that means that if you can get these groups together and they become majority and they can dictate to the leadership, they call that democracy, but that is not what was intended. It was never intended that we have this monolithic government in Washington, D.C. with so much power that allowed us to print money and run up debt and have income taxes and have a welfare state. That was never intended. But the deep state, the special interests, are in charge of that. So this is why you have to realize that tinkering around with an election doesn't do very much. That's only going to count if we wake up the whole people. But who's going to wake them up? I mean, we have a lot of people graduating from college or college students right now. They sort of think, oh, well, maybe the answer is socialism. But I give them a pass because they probably weren't even taught what socialism was about if they go to the average college. That's why I think the big effort has to be education outside the organized government schooling system that we have today. But I think the big myth here is that the Republicans and Democrats actually are competitors, and yet they're working against us, against the people, equally so.
Yes. Finally, Dr. Paul, let's finish up by diving into the fantasy world and throwing in a few life jackets. Hopefully people will grab on. Just yesterday, we had a fantastic guest on the show. His name was Professor Andrew Bacevich, and I recommend everybody watch that interview because he pointed out and he spoke a little bit about American exceptionalism and this illusion that people live under, thinking that the U.S. government has this duty, this providential duty, to remake the world in its own image. I guess when you go overseas and kill 1 million Iraqis, you're doing the Lord's work. I can't follow the concept. But please, Dr. Paul, elaborate some more on this myth called American exceptionalism?
Well, this is a risky discussion because nobody wants to say that we aren't the greatest and we aren't the best and we aren't the most exceptional nation ever. But I think the best way to handle this is think about the American people, the culture of the American people, the goodness in many Americans. And in that sense, I think there's so many exceptional people, very generous people, people who respond to natural disasters and really want to help people, are willing to send money to different countries that need help. But that's not what we're talking about. American exceptionalism is Jacobinism. You know, it's today it's called neo-Jacobinism, where we are a great nation, we are a great government, and we can do no harm. But it started out very early, because they talked about the manifest destiny of the United States. We were destined to do this, and it was early on that occurred, and it just massively expanded at the time of the Spanish-American War, when we spread our wings and went all the way to the Philippines and got involved after we took the continent, and that our government can do no wrong because the people are good, and therefore the government reflects the people, and it must be all well intended, and that's what the propaganda always says, that we're going for good reason. But this whole idea that all of a sudden we can return to that period of time when we were the exceptional good nation, we could do no wrong. I mean, we could go back and talk about many things. We have been a warring nation. The 20th century has been a disaster. If people think that the income tax was a great idea, or the Federal Reserve was a great idea in the 20th century, that's not exceptional. We go around the world taking over countries and telling them what you need is an income tax and what you need is a central bank. And what you need is a welfare safety net for everybody. And you need to be part of our army, and we'll tell you how to run your country. We're going to have elections like we have, but you have to elect the people we pick. If you don't, then we'll hire a dictator to overthrow you. So it goes on and on. But how could we be an exceptional country when we got involved in World War I? If anybody wants to find something that is very unexceptional, was the needlessness of getting into World War I, Woodrow Wilson making the world safe for democracy. What a disaster. And just look at what the consequence. World War II is just a continuation of World War I. Then we had the consequence of the Federal Reserve printing money to allow this to happen. The introduction of the welfare state, the introduction of accepting Keynesian economic interventionism, goes on and on. It just was the total undermining the great things that were talked about at the founding of this country. You know, believe it or not, I'm an optimist about the progress of individual liberty, but I have to go all the way back to the Hammurabi Code and the Ten Commandments and the Great Charter. You know, those were, and our Declaration of Independence. But America did okay for a bit. But I'll tell you what, just look into that last 150 years and what we have done overseas, we are exceptionally on the wrong track is what's happened. And so we have drifted a long way from improving and expanding on personal liberty. So everybody said, well, it's necessary because they're going to attack us. ISIS is coming. So therefore, we have to take away the rights of the people. We have to check everything that's going. You can get on an airplane and the government has to know everything that we do. We have no privacy left. They're destroying the value of the money. And then all the politicians are missing the whole point. All we have to do is argue over personalities and how you're going to spend more money and pretend the two parties are different. So I would say there's a lot to be said about the American people. And there's a lot to be said about historically over thousands of years that individuals have been educated to believe that liberty is a personal matter and it's not something American. And in that
Okay, sorry that audio cut off there. Okay, here it goes.
Exceptional country when we got involved in World War I. If anybody wants to find something that is very unexceptional, was the needlessness of getting into World War I. Woodrow Wilson making the world safe for democracy. What a disaster! And just look at what the consequence. World War II is just a continuation of World War I. Then we had the consequence of the Federal Reserve printing money to allow this to happen. The introduction of the welfare state. The introduction of accepting Keynesian economic interventionism. Goes on and on. It just was the total undermining the great things that were talked about at the founding of this country. You know, believe it or not, I'm an optimist about the progress of individual liberty, but I have to go all the way back to the Hammurabi Code and the Ten Commandments and the Great Charter. You know, those were and our Declaration of Independence. But America did okay for a bit. But I'll tell you what. Just look into that last 150 years and what we have done overseas, we are exceptionally on the wrong track is what's happened. And so we have drifted a long way from improving and expanding on personal liberty. So everybody said, well, it's necessary because they're going to attack us. ISIS is coming. So therefore, we have to take away the rights of the people. We have to check everything that's going. You can't get on an airplane and the government has to know everything that we do. We have no privacy left. They're destroying the value of the money, and then all the politicians are missing the whole point. All we have to do is argue over personalities and how you're going to spend more money and pretend the two parties are different. So I would say there's a lot to be said about the American people, and there's a lot to be said about historically over thousands of years that individuals have been educated to believe that liberty is a personal matter and it's not something granted to us by government, but it comes to us in a natural God-given way. When we understand that, and if we can promote that, we will be truly an exceptional nation. But we cannot be an exceptional nation with the policies that we have today, whether they're economic policy or foreign policy, because we are not on the right track, and the American people know it. Ask that famous question of the politician, are we on the right track or the wrong track? And most Americans say we're on the wrong track. But it's not hard to describe the right track. We know where the right track is. We know what liberty is all about. But we have been undermined by the propaganda, by the distortions and the temptations and the government-run school system. But believe me, the opportunity is still there. And that is the reason why I think we can find that part of America which is exceptional, and not the part that is a political authoritarian exceptionalism that we think that we can promote like they did in the French Revolution, because then if you didn't accept the ideas of democracy and these good trends, you can be in big trouble, and that's about the way it is in this country. So I'd like to look more toward the favorable thing, because we can be an exceptional nation by setting a good standard, let other countries want to emulate us. That would be a much happier scenario for me. Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today as the co-host.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul.
And I want to thank our audience for being with us as well. And please return to the Liberty Report soon.
Again, that was the Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, or you can go to ronpaullibertyreport.com. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, kind of go along with that, because, you know, he was talking about monetary policy, and, you know, a lot of what we've gotten into is the simple fact that they have been able to print money and create these gigantic militaries. And, you know, we always talk about, to get to freedom, we also have to talk about monetary policy. To, you know, the dollar in your pocket, for how long now, you know, since we went off the gold standard, has been losing the value. And it seems that the economy has not really been talked about in a monetary policy sense. It's always been talked about jobs and factories, but no one talks about, what about the dollar in your pocket and, you know, the Federal Reserve? And we need to talk more about that. But I do have an article here from Jeffrey Tucker out of Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org. This one's Trump's economic plan: higher taxes, higher inflation, and higher minimum wage. That didn't take long. It was only days after Donald Trump clinched the Republican nomination that the mask, such as it was, came off. Suddenly, he was telling multiple interviewers that he could be talked into raising taxes, boasting the minimum wage, and printing enough money to pay the national debt in cheap dollars. On my plan, taxes are going down, but by the time it's negotiated, they'll go up, Trump said. In my opinion, the taxes for the rich will go up somewhat. After the outcry, he claimed he met up for his proposed cuts. As for the minimum wage, he talks like Obama, completely uninterested in the market forces, as if what people are paid is purely at the discretion of political managers. I think people have to get more. I don't know how you live on $7.25 an hour. Well, most of those jobs at $7.25 an hour are beginner entry-level jobs, and entry-level jobs are meant for high school kids, and regulation stops a lot of the good, better paying jobs. Then you also have way overpaid jobs. Oh, I make $35 an hour putting connectors together in an assembly line. I'm part of a union. Except those unions are now, instead of fighting for $35, they're fighting to keep it above 20. Or sometimes even, above 15 for certain positions. And, the thing is, we have people that expect to get paid, managerial type, maybe wages, but doing the cashier's job. I know a lot of people that aren't willing to work harder, to learn more, or take on more responsibility. They don't want the responsibility, but they want the wages of the people that have to deal with that responsibility. But again, we do have too many adults working in positions that are entry-level positions, and part of that is, like I was saying, you got people that don't want to work harder, they just want paid more. The other part of that is there's not a lot of non-entry-level jobs for some of these people. A lot of these people came from better positions, better paying jobs, to working, fast food or Walmart or Myers or, some other box store or chain. Says, back to this article, it says, but he says he would leave it to the states to decide the height of the wage floor, which raises a question of why he is talking about it at all, since that can presumably happen now. The Department of Labor he would head as president possesses plenty of power to strongly nudge states however it wants. If Trump favors a higher wage floor, he is going to get it. And incidentally, such a higher floor could be a crucial part of an anti-immigration policy as well. If low-wage jobs become illegal, immigrants have no reason to cross the border at all. The eugenicists who passed the 1920s immigration laws understood this well. As for the national debt, he says it can be paid. We can't default, and so there's only one way forward: print the money. Wow, what gives? Somehow this torrent of policy ideas has shocked even Vox to notice the left-wing economics movement that Trump is adopting. Trump's consistency, being generally opposed to tax increases and holding the line on job-killing minimum wage increases, are two of the things that the Republicans at least pretend to be good at. In any case, no Republican presidential candidate in my lifetime has said he would increase taxes, so this is a departure, and certainly none has actually toyed with the idea of inflating away the debt, at least not publicly. It's a departure given his party, but no one should be startled at his willingness to grow government. If you think about the core of his program, it has always been about that. He wants to prevent American businesses from hiring people from abroad. He wants to take private property on the border and nationalize it by building a wall. He has praised Japanese internment, called for the shutting down parts of the internet, pushed for mass surveillance, and advocated vast new infringements on the right of Americans to buy products from abroad. That's just for starters. From the very beginning of his campaign this past summer, he has worked to build up a case for bigger and more intrusive government. He began with radical assaults on immigrants and international trade while extolling his managerial prowess as a much-needed CEO for the whole country. Usually, presidents run on a platform of reforming government, cutting government, improving government, controlling government, etc. After all, government, not the whole country, is their bellwether, but not Trump. He posits himself as the head of the whole country, running America the same way he runs his business. He would stamp his name brand on the nation as he does with everything else he owns, thereby imparting it with his own purported greatness. Probably the last president who was so open about his belief that he runs the nation was FDR himself. That Trump casually mentioned the possibility of raising taxes on the rich, we know how that goes, or inflate away the debt, should have caused no shock or alarm. It follows from his own philosophy of government, which is not that we live under a rule of law, but rather we should be living under the rule of one man. Blinded by anti-leftism, why would anyone believe that Trump is anything but a state builder? Much of it has to do with the strange way in which people infuse candidates with their own ideological longings, hoping against hope that Trump shares their values. Trump has fashioned himself as anti-establishment, a classic populist. You might think that has something to do with being anti-government, but you would be terribly wrong. For him, anti-establishment has always simply meant that the wrong people are in charge. This is something I've been saying for a long time. He's anti-establishment, but he's still for a strong government, just his government being strong. He doesn't like the people that are in charge. He wants to be in charge. But they still want the power, and I believe that Trump does too. But it says here, he has been disdainful of political correctness, made the right noises on guns and global warming, and so on. He opposes the left, which the naive observer might misinterpret as opposing government overreach. Surely we should know better. The 20th century, during which time fascism wreaked havoc on liberty, and did so in the name of opposing the communist threat, was not that long ago. In any case, illustrious minds like F.A. Hayek and Ludwig von Mises bore witness to this and tried to tell the world about the dangers of rightist authoritarians. They both published books in 1944, The Road to Serfdom and Omnipotent Government, respectively, that pointed out that despotism comes in many flavors. It can be left and it can be right. Opposing one and favoring the other is not the same as backing liberty. The right and the left legs of statism dance in a devil's ballet. One gains control and fosters resentment and reaction. The other takes over and wages war on its political enemies. The population is divided. It becomes a struggle over power, but each has an interest in gaining more. It's better to think of right and left as factions of the same party. Something Ron Paul's been talking about for how long now. Says here they can be right about some things some of the time, but neither pushes simple freedom as an answer to social and economic problems. No one wins the cultural war. For generations, the Republican Party has tolerated within its ranks a liberty-leaning minority. There have been many iterations, the supply-siders, the Leave Me Alone coalition, the Tea Party, and so on. Their interests have generally aligned with the merchant class and rank and file bourgeoisie that is fed up with the regulation, taxes, and war. With the traditional Republican coalition now shattered, Americans are newly acquainting themselves with a different and more consistent authoritarianism that has a right-wing flavor. I have argued elsewhere that this is accurately called fascism. It might seem like a movement organized to stop the march of the left, but it uses the same means to achieve ends that are only slightly different in cultural tone and appeal. You can read 1,000 definitions on what this is, but I favor Ludwig von Mises' own analysis. He says that at minimum, fascism is nativist on trade and migration and extols the leadership principle over national life. It is a form of socialism. It necessarily intervenes in the market, but its socialism dispenses with the parts that the middle class finds so annoying about the left. You can nominally keep your property, although in reality you merely administer it for the state. Family and religion can remain intact. What is required is that you direct your primary loyalties to the central state. In Mussolini's immortal words, all within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. Trump has said something similar. The nation state remains the true foundation for happiness and harmony. That was a quote from Trump again, if you want me to repeat it. The nation state remains the true foundation for happiness and harmony. Again, that was Trump. Beyond the Red Scare. Whenever I post about Trump, I get angry commenters demanding to know why I'm not railing against Clinton and Sanders. Every amount of rhetoric against Trump, they say, only helps the left and its agenda. But it's precisely this approach, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that has empowered regimes that are among the most murderous in history. True liberals should never be enticed by their seeming promise. In order to see and understand the danger, we have to look beyond the Red Scare and realize that politics is more complicated than merely opposing the worst evil. Those lesser evils who lower our guard by exploiting our fears of greater evils are often the greatest evil of all. Again, that was Jeffrey Tucker, Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org. Trump's economic plan, higher taxes, higher inflation, and higher minimum wage. Woo! Okay. Now, I got a few good stories I want to get to, but I did have another clip I wanted to play before I got too deep into these articles. And this, again, is about our economy and the dollar, our monetary policy. And this was from AMTV, Christopher Green, U.S. dollar collapse 2016, the secret war on cash. And there are a lot of stories out right now about a push for a cashless society, wanting everything to be digital, your U.S. currency to be digital. You can't keep it in a safe anymore type deal. That way they can know where all the dollars are and who's hoarding the money. And that kind of shows more empowerment to the state to be able to track the almighty dollar in whose hands it lies, so it knows who it needs to maybe get more money out of. Even though we know the people at the top will never have theirs taken, because they'll be the people in power and the people keeping others in power. So it's going to come out of the middle class and the poorest pocket, like it always does. But let's go ahead and get into this AMTV, Christopher Green, U.S. dollar collapse 2016, the secret war on cash.
Not long ago, it felt good to withdraw your cash from the bank, to expand a business, to go on vacation, or to buy a new car. But today, withdrawing your own cash has become very risky, according to the secret war on cash, a new Swiss America white paper. I just read this shocking report. It made my hair stand on end. I learned why banks are now required to spy on you and eye for the government, and then report any financial behavior deemed suspicious or unusual. Get the secret war on cash now by calling 1-800-289-2646. Did you know simply spending cash today is enough to get you branded as a potential criminal? That's right. You must read The Secret War on Cash. It's free by calling 1-800-289-2646 or click the link below. Find out how to survive and thrive by reading this special report. Give them a call today at 1-800. Not long about this in countless videos, thousands of videos now in circulation, warning that they're only building a bigger bubble, that none of our problems have been solved since 2008 and 2009. They've only been magnified. We see this with a $4.5 trillion debt balance at the Federal Reserve, something that's completely unheard of, and nobody in their right mind knows how they're going to unwind. With a massive accumulating national debt and all of these funny money programs literally throwing the kitchen sink in. Whether or not it's quantitative easing, or it's Operation Twist, or it's buying mortgage-backed securities, or it's NERP to ZERP to all these interest rate shenanigans. At some point, we're going to have to pay the piper. And as we saw in 2008 and 2009, it's not the banksters that pay, it's you.
Let me ask you this, just briefly, on the $4.5 trillion balance sheet that the Fed now has, as we look at where we are today, has there been any thought, looking in the rearview mirror, that might have been good to unload some of that earlier so there was additional ammunition should that be needed in the future?
Well, so I think the thinking about additional ammunition is that the best ammunition we have and the single most reliable and predictable tool for affecting the stance of monetary policy is variations in short-term interest rates. We have a choice between selling off assets or raising short-term interest rates.
Now, I'm talking about as the economy goes the other direction. And I guess the question then is, so you've got a pretty loaded up balance sheet, and I think people are beginning to observe that the Fed is probably out of ammunition unless you decided to go to negative rates. And if you could briefly I'm not proposing this. I'm just observing what's happening around the world and what's happening here in our own country. I think people are waking up and realizing that the Fed really has no real ammunition left.
Now, I don't want to just talk about the negatives today. I don't want to just talk about what's coming. And keep in mind, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know exactly how things play out. I'm not making predictions. But what I do know and what I understand is math. And I understand at some point there's going to be a reversion to the mean. So when you blow magnificent bubbles, eventually they pop. You know, what did your mom or dad always tell you? What goes up must come down. We know, for example, this is just a fact, that business cycles last typically between 5 and 8 years. So if we have an expansion and there's growth, there's typically an expansion from 5 to 8 years, followed by a recession for 5 to 8 years, followed by another expansion, and then a recession. And at times, when things are magnified, like what we're seeing today, or what we saw in the 1930s Great Depression, or we saw in 2008 and 2009 with digital bank runs and trillion-dollar bailouts, you have a crash. You have a economic calamity, a collapse. You have potentially a depression. And it's honest to God, not just what I think is coming, it's what is coming. Because again, it is math. It is not my opinion, and it is not a prediction. But more importantly, instead of just talking about what's coming, I also want to give and provide some actionable strategies, because nothing that I talk about is fear-mongering. It's real. And I want to empower you guys, and I want to give you guys some actionable alternatives to prepare for this kind of thing. Now, I mentioned this in a previous video. I've recently partnered with a company out here in the Valley of the Sun, Arizona, a family business, people that I know very well, an honest, good-hearted business that wants to help people. Their name is Swiss America. They're a precious metals dealer here locally, not too far from our studio here in Scottsdale. You can download a free report. It's information. It's free. You can't say no to that. There's no obligation. All you have to do is put in your name, put in your email address, and your phone number, and they'll send you a free report that I put together personally with them talking about the secret war on cash and what all of this means. So let me give you a little bit of the inside track here. We're seeing now in Europe, for example, a ban on $500 euro bills. A ban on it. Why? Ask yourself that question. Now, their official story is, well, they're banning it because, drug dealers are using it and there's like illegal activity. The same reason they want to attack digital currency and Bitcoin. Bullshit. We know that's not the truth. The reason they're attacking these large denominated bills, and they've been talking about this, eliminating the $100 bill here in the United States of America, is because there is a secret war on cash. You see, they don't want you to have access to your money. So let's say we just wake up tomorrow from a nice, pleasant sleep or a nap that you were taking in the afternoon, and suddenly you can't withdraw your cash from the bank. Okay, we've seen this with Chase Bank recently with non-customers not allowing to take out high denomination bills out of the ATMs. What if that happens? What if you don't have access to your cash? Why are they turning interest rates negative? They're turning interest rates negative because they want you to spend the currency. They don't want you to try to withdraw and create what is known as a bank run, all of your assets from the bank at any given time. Because again, if you're educated, you understand we live in a fractional reserve banking system. For every dollar that is deposited in a bank, $10 of that are loaned out to other banks, and then it's magnified to infinity, which makes up the criminal Federal Reserve printing and backing our currency by nothing. It's fiat paper. They just print as much as they want. So actionable strategy. So, okay, Christopher, what does this mean? Okay, yes, I'm in agreement. This is a freaking giant bubble. None of our problems have been solved. Okay, so there's going to be a debt collapse. The dollar is going to collapse in the not too distant future. It's going to devalue, as we've seen over a long curve over the past 50 to 100 years, especially when we went off the gold standard that only became magnified. Well, what do I do? Number one, action strategy. And I've talked about this extensively recently because I'm really, really passionate about it. And I want you taking action. I don't want your head in the sand. I've talked about asset allocation. You've probably heard your mom and dad talk about this. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Diversify. I go over this in detail with a lot of our videos. You can go back in our archive. But one of those most important buckets, in addition to asset allocation, one of those most important buckets is gold. Physical. Not GLD, not the ETF, which can go poof overnight, just like fiat currency, but actual physical gold bullion. It can be coins, it can be collectibles, it can be silver. Some people prefer gold or silver. I personally prefer gold. Now, in my model portfolio allocation, I recommend anywhere from 7.5% to 15% or more, depending on your unique situation. Talk to a financial advisor. Okay, don't take my word for it. Everybody's situation is unique. Doesn't predict future returns. You guys know all that stuff. But I've recommended 7.5% to 15% roughly, in my humble opinion, should be allocated to gold. Why? Because people like Donald Trump, people like me, prognosticators that you hear on CNBC, the people that have actually gotten it right, by the way, the people that have actually called the duck a duck and called it right.
It's impossible to predict the time when confidence will be lost, but it can come quickly. Resorting to buying other paper currencies will not be of much help. When the dollar crashes, most likely the purchasing power of all currencies, since all currencies hold dollars as a reserve, will go down as well. This means that dollars and other currencies will go into buying consumer items, precious metals, and other physical properties. Consumer prices will soar, as well as interest rates. The central bank will lose control, and the more they inflate, the worse the confidence becomes. The interest rates will respond to these efforts by rising sharply. If the Fed tries to reverse the run on the dollar, interest rates will also soar, and the pain on the American citizens will be of such proportion that political chaos will result. Either scenario leads to political and social chaos, the third event, and the most dangerous.
You want some kind of allocation in that most important bucket, which I believe to be gold bullion, because in the not too distant future, I wholeheartedly believe, and this is math, based on the incredible debt load that's been pumped out in recent years, U.S. Treasury bonds will no longer be a riskless asset. Let me repeat that. The long-standing, tried and true assumption that U.S. Treasury bonds are a near riskless investment will change sometime in the very near future. In our lives, when you wake up from that nap, or you get up in the morning, and all of a sudden, there's going to be a massive withdrawal from creditor nations. This is how wars start, by the way. It's something we're already engaged with. Who's the largest creditor here in the world to the United States federal government? Because we all know the United States federal government is the largest debtor. Isn't that something to be proud of? The largest debtor in the United States is the United States of America. Countries like China are going to begin massive withdrawals. Again, there's a war on cash. If they know that these assets are no longer riskless, and all of this is baked into the pie right now, it's why they've established the AIIB, the counterpoint to the World Bank and the IMF, the Western-dominated money printers and loan sharks of the world. All of a sudden, the dollar is going to continue, as it already is, devaluing, and there's going to be a collapse in the value of currency.
The IMF's executive board decided that the renminbi qualified for the SDR basket under existing criteria. This determination, which has been made today, will become effective on October 1st, 2016, in order to allow for the institutions, the central banks, and all users of SDRs to prepare for that new basket of currencies.
We see this around the world. We see this in Venezuela with hyperinflation. We saw this in the Weimar Republic, one of the reasons World War II began, and it ushered in the political vacuum of dictators that Western nations went to war with. All of this is baked into the pie. How do you protect yourself? With an asset allocation, and also what I believe to be the most important part of that bucket, gold, physical. Again, click that link below right now. Visit our partner, Swiss America. Okay, I've got a link there. Enter your information, your name, your email, and your phone number. Download a free report. No obligation. It's education. Again, I've been talking about this recently. I read voraciously. I'm reading 400 plus pages a day, book after book. Why? Because time is limited. Honestly, it's keeping me up at night. There's a healthy sense of fear. But you know what it's also given me? Peace of mind. Because I'm taking action. I'm getting my ducks in a row before that next financial crash, before that next event. Donald Trump just recently spoke about this, how potentially if he was elected president of the United States, he would just default like he does with his real estate businesses, and the fancy term is restructure the debt. That means taking haircuts. That means that the largest assumed risk-free asset in the world, the U.S. dollar, would no longer be a risk-free asset. And that would have profound economic repercussions globally in U.S. financial system. I'm actually not even sure if Donald Trump understands the ramifications of it, because he's taking more of a business approach to understanding government debt. And I'm not quite sure he honestly gets it. The impact that this would actually have. It would be a collapse of the dollar overnight. A collapse would mean that the dollar dropped maybe 30% in a heartbeat, and that debtor nations like China begin massive withdrawals. And again, I also think this will be part of war and the war narrative that's coming, because we've seen this in history before. What happened after the 1930s Great Depression that took about 2 decades for us to break even after the stock market lost roughly 80% of its value? Well, it took a freaking world war. It took World War II, millions of people dead. Talked about this a little bit recently in some of my on-demand stuff about how there's going to be a cooling. I really believe that's going to happen. I think likely the cooling will make a part of war. Again, that's how you get rid of people. Another reason, math, there's going to be a reversion to the mean. Again, unless the Federal Reserve, this New World Order paradigm, is able to manage this perfectly into this quote-unquote beautiful soft landing, unless they're able to do that, and I honest to God hope that they do, and at that point, you'll still be fine because you've got your asset allocation, you've got gold, you're properly diversified across different asset classes. That's great. That's a wonderful world. If they get it wrong and they can't manage it, and it looks like 2008, 2009 again, and it's an engineered collapse, like what we've seen in the past, that's what the wealth transfer was, again, getting ready for the cooling. Again, people think this is fear-mongering. They think it's conspiracy, but it's not. Actions speak louder than words. Well, then you'll know you'll be prepared for what's coming. You'll have that peace of mind when, for some reason, you can't access your cash at the bank. Because as they've done in Europe, you can't get $500 euros anymore. And what they might soon do here in the United States, you might not be able to get high-denominated $100 bills. It's not because of drug dealing. Okay, it's not because bad apples are trading currency back and forth. It's because they do not want you to have access to your own money. Again, negative interest rates means, Warren Buffett talked about this recently at his conference, that means that if you had $1, for example, and there's negative 2% interest rates, you'll only get 98 cents back. In that case, what did Warren Buffett say over the weekend? I talked a little bit about this. He said he would consider taking all of his billions of dollars in cash on Berkshire Hathaway's balance sheet and depositing it into his own personal vault, turning the door, locking the key, and throwing it away. He'd be better off doing that. You know, I don't like Warren Buffett. I think he's a scumbag, but he does know money. He's also properly diversified, and he also has a proper asset allocation. Again, folks, I want to give you some actionable strategies to prepare so you have peace of mind, so that you're not just living in fear. Time is limited. This is coming. It's knocking on your door. Click the link below right now. Get a free report from Swiss America, put together by me personally. Download The Secret War on Cash. No obligation. Just get some information. Give these guys a call. Ask some questions. They're here to help. They're here to consult you and hold your hand, so to speak, to help you so that if you're not already doing this, you can start. And if you're already doing this, you can work with a company that I've actually personally vetted. An honest, good, family-owned business. It's been in the valleys of the sun for...
Okay, we're going to cut. He's going into the ads. But this is something that a lot of people have been talking about. He played the clip where the lady was talking about October of 2016. Well, with what's going on and the IMF and everything, with what Russia's doing, with what China's doing, with what Saudi Arabia is threatening to do if we release these 28 pages, even though that's kind of a side note, it's also kind of intertwined. It's something I don't think the Saudis are too afraid to do because they can align quickly with probably China, maybe. We have a system being set up that they're not afraid to collapse the U.S. dollar. They're not afraid to collapse America, because if you even pay attention to our immigration, with the way they're managing, go stand in line at the airport. Drive 100 miles away from the U.S. border and come across these checkpoints where they're checking you. While at the same time they're allowing illegal immigration, they're making these sanctuary cities where when they do get them, they ID them, put them in the system, and then release them back in the U.S. what they're doing is basically kind of is this is what it looks like to me, is that they're installing a police state for a global society, because they're not looking at borders, they're looking at checkpoints within the country. They're, you know, you to be able to fly out of the country, you have to go through all this. They want to make it where on trains, buses, ships, every point of any type of entry, they want you to have to go through these checkpoints. But they don't have a problem with immigrants coming in, as long as they can get them in the system. They rather do it that way. Yeah, you know, capture the people coming in. We'll get them in the system, and then we'll put them in a sanctuary city. So what it looks like to me is a authoritarian police state being established for a global society, rather than our, you know, the United States of America. You know, this is not a system that seems to be for the United States of America. It's a system that's almost like a test system for the globe. And we've seen something similar that they did over in India, where they went through and they were doing biometrics on everyone. And here in America, it's been a lot harder for them to institute things. I did see an article not too long ago that was talking about a school cafeteria going to put in fingerprint scanners for kids to get their lunch. And, you know, parents are starting to be outraged, and privacy advocates are talking about how this may, you know, hurt your child's future identity, and how all this is being used. And it really kind of, all of this being kind of put into place makes you think. And then, you know, all these Facebook revelations that we have about how they're suppressing, which most of us already knew this, but they suppress a lot of news. Give me a second. But we have Facebook that they kind of don't really want to admit that they're censoring, but we kind of know that they are. And we had this was out of Bloomberg. Angela Merkel confronts Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg on hate post policy. And actually, I have one here I want to play. Let me play this clip here, and this is
it was supposed to be this amazing celebration.
Sorry. This is from Lisa Haven on... Actually, I don't think this one wants to play here. Huh. Okay, I'll play this Bloomberg one then. I already had this one queued up. Okay, here we go.
Happened here, Hans?
Well, the German press is describing it as a table microphone. And what the table microphone picked up was Merkel sort of muffledly asking a question to Zuckerberg. And then you hear Zuckerberg, and it's on this issue of what Facebook is going to do about monitoring, policing racist, xenophobic comments about refugees here in Germany. It's a big issue. We hear for Zuckerberg's response pretty clearly on the tape, or at least people who are listening it did. He said, we need to do some work. And then, Guy, there's the Merkel follow-up. She basically asks the same question again and says, but you're working on this. And Zuckerberg can only say yes. Look, I know there's a humorous aspect whenever private conversations are picked up on public microphones, but Germany is taking this issue very seriously. It gets the core of what they're trying to do, house, potentially find jobs for these incoming immigrants, incoming refugees. And there have been some ugly attacks, some racist attacks, some arson attacks on refugee housing. What the justice minister here at the end of last month did was write Facebook and say they needed to urgently review their policies. It really gets at sort of this difference between what tech companies think they're allowed to do and what the German state sometimes demand of them. Heiko Maas, the justice minister, said that they need to urgently review. He said then he had a meeting here in mid-September with Facebook executives. Their basic point is, if Facebook polices nude photos, right, then why can't they police racist or xenophobic comments? That's the line from the German government. They're concerned about it, and they want more cooperation from big tech companies like Facebook. Guy?
The problem with this whole thing is, what do you consider racist? Now we have a lot of very liberal and pro-globalism type people that, which, you know, in a way I am, but not in the way that it's being engineered. It's a forced system. It's not a system where you get people that are moving just to make a better life, and you have a forced migration using war to force people out of an area and force them into the country, which you're going, hey, here's open door. And you also know that you have those same people that you're bombing coming through the door mad at you. Perfect idea. Again, it's a controlled system, and so it's a forced migration type policy that's being put in place. And we have people that have noted that posts on Facebook that even bring up the topic of any type of rape by immigrants and stuff like that is being censored. So, you know, that raises a problem. That's not racist. That's not anti-immigration. It's anti what's happening. The unchecked immigration that, you know, the war that's forcing these people out of their homes. And, you know, a lot of the European countries, the U.S. and our people are involved in that. And I'm not, you know, we have two wrongs trying to make a right, and it doesn't work. You have the terrorists, which are legitimate terrorists that are over there that want to wage war and, you know, create this this religious caliphate, I guess you would call it. And, you know, they're wreaking havoc over there after we went over there and wreaked havoc. And now they're also running around with our gear. And we keep giving rebels that turn out to, you know, switch over to the ISIS side. Everything that's going on, and then we're supposed to go, yeah, bring all these angry people over here. And the problem is there's a lot of them that probably deserve to be accepted in our society. And even though they might hold their own beliefs, they're not out to cause anybody harm. They're just out to try to live a happy and successful life. And they're not going to get the chance because of how it's all being engineered and played out. And again, it's a divide and conquer. So it's something that I think people miss the point in different ways. So it's just a real complicated situation. I got one last article I want to cover, kind of dealing with the economy. And this one is from the economiccollapseblog.com. Sorry, my dog is making a little noise in the background. She likes to lay in here while I'm doing my show. Rail traffic depression. 292 Union Pacific engines are sitting in the Arizona desert doing nothing. We continue to get more evidence that the U.S. economy has entered a major downturn. Just last week, I wrote about how U.S. GDP growth numbers have been declining for 3 quarters in a row, and previously I wrote about how corporate defaults have surged in their highest level since the last financial crisis. Well, now we are getting some very depressing numbers from the rail industry. As you will see below, U.S. rail traffic was down more than 11% from a year ago in April. That is an absolutely catastrophic number, and the U.S. rail industry is feeling an enormous amount of pain right now. This also tells you that the real economy is really slowing down because less stuff is being shipped by rail all over the nation. One of the economic commentators that I have really come to respect is Wolf Richard of Wolfstreet.com. He has a really sharp eye for what is really going on in the economy and in the financial world, and I find myself quoting him more and more as time goes by. If you have not checked out his site yet, I very much encourage you to do so. On Wednesday, he posted a very alarming article about what is happening to our rail industry. The kinds of numbers that we have been seeing recently are the kinds of numbers that we would expect in an economic depression was starting. The following is an excerpt from that article. Total U.S. rail traffic in April plunged 11.8% from a year ago, the Association of American Railroads reported today. Carloads of bulk commodities such as coal, oil, grains, and chemicals plummeted 16.1% to 944,339 units. The coal industry is in a horrible condition and cannot compete with the U.S. natural gas. At current prices, coal-fired power plants are being retired. Demand for steam coal is plunging. Major U.S. coal miners, even the largest one, are now bankrupt. So in April, carloads of coal plummeted 40% from the already beaten down levels a year ago. Because rail traffic is down so dramatically, many operators have large numbers of engines that are just sitting around collecting dust. In this article, Wolf Richard shared photographs from Google Earth that showed some of the 292 Union Pacific engines that are sitting in the middle of the Arizona desert doing absolutely nothing. The following is one of the photographs which I'm looking at right now, and it's just a line of engines connected to each other just sitting out in the desert. As Wolf Richard pointed out, it costs lots of money for these engines just to sit there doing nothing. These engines are expensive pieces of equipment. When they just sit there not pulling trains, they become capacity, and they get very expensive. Then there are engineers and other personnel who suddenly become unproductive. Some of them have already been laid off or are getting laid off. All over the world, similar numbers are coming in. For example, the Baltic Dry Index fell 30 more points on Wednesday after falling 21 on Tuesday. Global trade is really slowing down during the early portion of 2016. What this means on a practical level is that a lot less stuff is being bought, sold, and shipped around the planet. It is becoming increasingly difficult for authorities to deny that the new global recession has begun, and at this moment we are only in the very early chapters of this new crisis. Another thing that I watch very closely is the velocity of money. When an economy is healthy, people feel pretty good about things, and money tends to circulate fairly rapidly. For example, I may buy something from you, then you may buy something from someone else, etc. But when times get tough, people tend to hold on to their money more tightly, and that is why the velocity of money goes down when recessions hit. In the chart below, the shaded areas represent recessions, and you can see that the velocity of money has declined during every single recession in the post-World War II era. And we are on basically a drop-off right now. Right here, the ratio to the year 1960, it was around average of 1.8. 1970, about the same. By 1980, it was up by right after 1980, probably 1981, 1982, it got up about 1.95, near there. By 1990, it was down around 1.85. By 90, or let's just say 2000, it was dropping off. And that's when we had the recession. It dropped off to 1.73, 72. And right now, we are sitting down about 1.45. It just, we have a drop off. We have a short spike after the 08 recession. And then it kind of starts dropping, then it kind of leveled off for a split second, dropped a little bit, leveled off slightly, but still falling. And then now we're just kind of on a downward trend. During the last recession, the velocity of money declined precipitously, and that makes perfect sense. But then a funny thing happened. There was a slight bump up once the recession was over, but then it turned down again, and it has kept going down ever since. In fact, the velocity of money has now dropped to an all-time low. The velocity of M2 just recently dipped below 1.5 for the first time ever. This is not a sign of economic recovery. What this tells us is that our economy is very, very sick, and we can see evidence of the sickness all around us. For instance, Los Angeles Times is reporting that homelessness in LA increased by 11% last year, and this marked the fourth year in a row that homeless in the city has increased. It has a short excerpt from LA Times, it looks like. Homelessness rose 11% in the city of LA and 5.7% in the county last year, despite an intensive federal push that slashed the county ranks of homeless veterans by nearly a third. According to a report released Wednesday, the increase marks the fourth consecutive year of rising homelessness in LA as local officials struggle to identify funding for billion-dollar plans they approved to solve the nation's most intractable homeless problem. Let us also not forget that about half of the country is basically flat broke at this point. Just recently, the Federal Reserve found that 47% of all Americans could not pay an unexpected $400 emergency room bill without selling something or borrowing money from somewhere. With numbers such as these being reported, how in the world can anyone possibly claim that the U.S. economy is in good shape? It boggles the mind, and yet there are people out there that would actually have you believe that everything is just fine. The current occupant of the White House is one of them. With each passing month, the real economy is getting even worse. We may not have slipped into a full-blown economic depression just yet, but it is coming. For now, let us be thankful for whatever remains of our debt-fueled prosperity, because we don't deserve the massively inflated standard of living that we have been enjoying. We have been consuming far more than we produced for decades, but it won't last for much longer, and when those days are gone for good, we will mourn them bitterly. Again, that was from the economiccollapseblog.com. And I know, this all sounds depressing, but, this is something that people like Ron Paul and others have been warning about. Hayek, von Mises, and it's something that, these people wave these flags around and don't know really what they're protesting for. Definitely the socialists, they want everything to be better and them to have things, and they just don't understand a true system that can thrive. And understanding socialism is an understanding that things don't just thrive, bad things happen. And the more freedom a society has, the more ability for it to prosper. You're still going to have your problems in society. You're still going to have people that want to hurt others, or people that don't want to, be productive in society and maybe want to not work for what they get. They rather rob people. You're going to have these problems no matter what. The understanding is that government doesn't solve this. And if they try to solve it, what they end up doing is hurting everyone in the process, which only turns everyone against that whole system that you created or allowed to be created. So, we have to address these. And this whole election cycle it's showing me that people aren't truly looking at a lot of the issues that should be looked at. They're playing into these emotional rhetoric that these politicians are putting out to garner their support, and it's working. Propaganda at its finest. Okay. I kind of wanted to move on to a couple of articles. One I'm going to cover, it's another one from Foundation for Economic Education. I'll get to that one in a second. And that one's by Jeffrey Tucker, too. And that one's titled How to Find Joy in an Unfree World. But first, I want to cover a pretty good article out of Reason.com that is kind of a good article here. Flying Dog Brewery wins First Amendment battle. Uses proceeds to promote free speech. Good beer and free speech both prevail in this uncharacteristically feel-good First Amendment story. First, Maryland's Flying Dog Brewery won in its battle with the Michigan Liquor Control Commission after the agency tried to ban the sale of Flying Dog's delicious Belgian-style IPA because of the brew's name, Raging Bitch. The Liquor Commission also objected to the beer's label, or labels. Flying Dog sued the commission in 2009, but the case didn't come to a close until last year when the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit sided with the brewery, saying Michigan's officials could be held liable for violating the brewery's First Amendment rights, and Flying Dog could pursue damages for lost sales during the ban. Now Flying Dog has announced that it will use the damages received in that case to found the First Amendment Society, a nonprofit dedicated to awareness raising, the advocacy around free speech issues, and organizing events that promote the arts, journalism, and civil liberties. Flying Dog will launch the organization with a May 31st event at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., featuring constitutional lawyer Alan Gura. Some of the Society's first orders of business will be establishing a scholarship at the University of Maryland's College of Journalism and hosting a banned book club this summer at Flying Dog Brewery. We don't like arbitrary authoritarianism, Flying Dog CEO Jim Caruso said in a lengthy Brightest Young Things profile about his company last August. The market should decide if they don't like our beer or our names, they can choose not to buy it, he added. We do believe that freedom of speech is a last defense against tyranny. In announcing the First Amendment Society launch, Caruso said that the First Amendment affects and makes possible all aspects of our lives, yet is constantly being threatened by the same democratic body that established it. It's imperative that we continue to fight beyond the courtroom. Again, that was at Reason.com. Go check out that article there. Now, I want to get to this article here from Jeffrey Tucker, Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org. How to Find Joy in an Unfree World. A writer from the Gilded Age past shows the way forward. Quote, what you are complaining about all the time, people sometimes ask me. I'm just about as free as I want to be. Here's the problem. How can we really know what we are missing if we never had it before? The less free we are, the less we know about freedom, or know what freedom feels like and how it shapes who we are. The more dependent on government we become, the less we crave independence. This is why it is important to find literature that takes us out of our present moment and introduces us to different ways of thinking. We have to imagine a different ideal. This is why I'm nuts for a book that came out right about the end of the Gilded Age and just before we got the permanent income tax and the Fed, as well as World War I. It is the last book at the mindset of what should be called the real greatest generation. A neglected journalist, the author of The Joys of Living is Orson Swett Martin, 1850 to 1924. And then he's got a link where you can download the book. I first bumped into his writings when searching the entrepreneurs of the Gilded Age. He turns out to be the great psychologist and sociologist of the generation that built the modern age in America. He was a physician, a hotel owner, and a fantastic thinker and writer. He was the editor of Success Magazine, a hugely influential publication during the age when Americans adored their inventors and entrepreneurs. In a world and a time I admire because it was built by the unleashing of the capitalist spirit In the second half of the 19th century, it was the height of the age of laissez-faire. Slavery was gone, women gained authentic rights, upward social mobility was a common expectation, lives lengthened, infant mortality fell dramatically. In one generation, creative and motivated people could move forward from poor immigrant to wealthy benefactor of museums. The rich of yesterday became the middle class of today, even as tomorrow would mint the newly rich. And the process continued without end, each advance touching everyone throughout society. There were new products, new services, new forms of communication and transportation, and each seemed to point to a future of peace and prosperity. Such inventions were celebrated in great public spectacles called World's Fairs. It was a time when incomes were not taxed, a major factor in why it would be accumulated to become powerful investment capital. Most schooling was private or community based. There was no professional licensure. There were no passports. There was not a single regulatory bureaucracy in Washington. There was no welfare state. No one had yet experienced a world war. The unleashing of the mind, Orson Swett Marden was a public intellectual who made sense of it all. He was a serious journalist, a great thinker, and a wonderful writer. His outlook embodies the ebullient optimism of the Gilded Age. He studied the phenomenon of progress and tried to discern its causes. He located them in the hearts and minds of men and women who made the difference. He devoted his life to chronicling their lives and the lives of those they touched with their creativity and generosity. The point was not to celebrate privilege, but rather to see the possibilities available to every person. Martin himself was like many of the first generation rich of this period. He came from poverty. He faced family hardship. He worked his way out of difficulty to find promise and reward. He saw how the sacrifices made in youth turned to a bounty in middle age. There was cause and effect that operated in the universe. Hard work, dedication, determination, and dreams could remake one's world and the whole world. The greatest discovery of the time was not a technology, but a philosophy. It was the philosophy that the individual human mind was the most productive resource on the planet, more powerful than all the natural resources or man-made machinery. It was the human mind that was the real source of progress and prosperity. Previous generations believed they were trapped by fate, by class, by social position, or by forces more powerful than they. The generation saw the truth that nothing could contain an idea whose time had come, so long as there were great men and women around who believed in it and acted upon it. This is why so many notable men of his time cited Martin as their inspiration: Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Harvey Firestone, and J.P. Morgan. A Guide to Life. Martin's recipe is made of 3 parts: seeing, emulating, and acting. To his mind, there are no circumstances that we face that could make doing this impossible. The source of joy is around us, but we have to seek it, see it, embrace it, and expand upon it. As for daily discouragements and obstacles, they are unfavorable features of life. They exist in all times and places. You can never get rid of the enemies of your personal progress, but you can make the most of things as they are. In the course of this, we all make blunders, mistakes, and have plenty of reason to criticize ourselves. But this is the most unproductive activity. You can't accomplish anything for the future as you gaze and always in the past. Martin writes, nothing is more foolish, nothing more wicked than to drag the skeletons of the past, the hideous images, the foolish deeds, the unfortunate experiences of yesterday into today's work to mar and spoil it. The right attitude of the entrepreneur is to think of the past as a dead and tomorrow as not yet born. The only time that really belongs to us is here and now. The passing moment, if we dedicate ourselves to make the best out of the present, one decision and action at a time, we can make a great future for ourselves. The art of living is the art of living in the today. Designed to inspire. Let me see where our time is here. I don't want to get too far ahead of us. Okay. It is unapologetically designed to inspire, and it does this as few books I've ever read. It really amounts to spelling out a life philosophy, one that deeply practical and actionable in every way, every day. Indeed, this might be the most inspiring book you will ever read, not because it solves all mysteries concerning who we are, how we got here, or what we should seek as the very purpose of life. He stays away from these larger questions because it is the smaller questions that are more interesting and effective. What he deals with more directly concerns what we might call a more mundane aspect of philosophy, how we should approach every day in order to get the most out of life. As such, this is a philosophy of how to live an excellent life no matter what our calling is. Capitalist, monk, mother, teacher, worker, banker, mechanic, musician, preacher, writer, whatever we do can be done with a sense of joy, a spirit of awe, and an ambition to drive forward the engines of progress. In some ways, this book is a relic in the best sense of that term. I don't even believe it could be. Sorry. Written today. We lack the social template that could produce such work. The spirit is not in the air that could allow us to extract such thoughts. People today are too vexed, too burdened, too distracted to see these things. But Martin did see them. Just because we are too often blind to the reality that he illuminates in these pages doesn't mean that it is not our reality too. Note that nowhere does he talk of storming Washington, agitating for our rulers to overthrow themselves, or sending institutions into upheaval, much less agitating for societal transformation and uplift. He speaks only to the individual. He tells you what you can do in your time, right where you are, to bring happiness to your life. Social and
This empty, powerful.
sorry, some ad popped up. And that's funny because the only thing I had open was YouTube. No ad was going. Okay. I seen it just like pop up. Bam. Okay. Back to this. His values: work, creativity, seeking out joy, feeling happiness, letting go of the past, living in the present, never regretting mistakes, never feeling fear, always being loyal, spreading good cheer, looking past obstacles, being kind to others, staying out of debt, keep life balanced between the need for money and the need for beauty, and never losing one's ideals. This is the essence of the modern worldview. Freedom and the mind. It's the perfect time to draw attention to this work more than 100 years after its publication. It's amazing to me that it had never been lost, or had ever been lost. That it will make a difference in your life. You might use its wisdom to make a difference in the world around you. Indeed, this is an example of the kind of book that could completely change the world. Why? Because Martin understands freedom and the individual mind and their power, once combined, to make a gigantic difference now and in the future. My whole experience suggests that personal inspiration is the ingredient lacking in the current generation of people who have come to love liberty. They have access to text, knowledge, and theory as never before in human history. What they lack is the method for using what they know and the personal drive to do so. People are too quick to blame outside forces for failure without realizing that outside forces conspire against progress, are part of the structure of all environments in all times and places. This book provides the missing element, that key to brush away despair and unlock their inner drive to make a difference. Prepare to use your highlighter tool. It will be used as never before. Then join me in finding the joys of life and working to make life more joyful for others. Then it goes into some choice passages, and you can go ahead and check out the rest of that at fee.org. And it is titled How to Find Joy in an Unfree World. And you know, that the book he's talking about, it covers a lot of what I talk about. It's a book I came across before. And it really, it's things I've talked about on this broadcast so many times about, you know, the way you interact with others, no matter, you know, what's going on. And, you know, again, I also admit that I'm guilty of not doing things right all the time, but I do try to take effort to be more of a joy to others in society and a joy to people around me. But I'm also someone that's going to stick up for myself and my family and my friends and my community. But I do want to be someone that is a asset to society in a voluntarist way. I'm not going to involve myself in things I might not agree with, even if I'm not, you know, it might not be something that should be banned, but I shouldn't have to involve myself in it. But I try to be, you know, it's the little things like that article said, and the book talks about, it does come down to the little things because, you know, opening the door for someone, that little thing, and, you know, you see it in commercials now sometimes where, you know, one person opens the door for someone that has their hands full, and that person realizes it and does something for another person. That person, you know, it makes them feel good, and they do something for another person, and it just becomes a chain reaction. And those little things are what are productive. And that's another thing I hate about this whole election cycle, that we don't see, you know, people like Ron Paul when he was running. He really just captivated people on the right. He captivated people that were just independently thought type people, libertarians, Democrats. He grabbed all these people's attention, not because he was playing off emotions. It was just because he was talking about all the legitimate problems that constrain your ability as a free individual to live your life as you choose. So a conservative looks at that and goes, yeah, you know, I want to live my Christian life. I feel like Christianity is under attack. And then you would have the, you know, maybe an atheist going, yeah, I feel that Christians are always trying to attack the atheists. Well, I just want to live my life. So you have all these different groups, different races, everybody just going, yeah, I just, me and my family, I want me and my family, my friends, we choose to live our life a certain way. We don't want to harm other people. We don't want to, you know, be worried about other people and how they live their lives. We just want the ability to live our life without feeling that we're going to have government come after us. And we see people from all cultures of, you know, that come out of America get attacked by government, and somehow we're still fighting each other and not fighting for a just cause. To, you know, you're not going to come into our community and do that to, you know, our community. And I guess we do see more of it, but, you know, it's been a slower progress. And then when you look at the elections of today, it feels like we're taking some steps backwards. But, you know, things like 10th Amendment Center, and a lot of work they've done, and just other individuals that have used the 10th Amendment and nullified federal laws. That way they can, you know, operate in a more freer capacity as a state, as, you know, businesses, as communities. They nullify federal law. And we should see more of that. But understand that we need to be aware that we can't let them try to sneak back doors in that allow them to come in and then stop it. Because, you know, they will eventually. Definitely, if it's something that doesn't catch fire real quick. Only happens in one state, and they can stomp it out there quick enough. Those are things that they might, will, and have attempted. You know, with so much bad news, I wanted to bring some good news to the end of the broadcast. And the good news is that we still have a somewhat free society. And we got to, you know, use that freedom, not just try to grasp the last of it. We actually need to use it. Otherwise, we will just give it up. And informing people and spreading this type of knowledge is a great way to do it. And I'm thankful to UCY for having this platform that we are able to spread these messages of freedom and expose the corruption. And we need to hold on to every avenue that we have to spread the information. And I think that even if we go into a depression, I think if communities and society just realize that we just need to buckle down and worry about ourselves and basically shed the government off of our backs, we might have a chance. But I think we are facing some economic hard times coming on, and they're coming on real quick. Don't forget to check out ucy.tv. Scroll down towards the bottom. You'll see an Amazon tab. Click that tab and shop Amazon through ucy.tv. And UCY gets a little kickback from that. You get the same great prices and shipping rates. So go check them out, ucy.tv. Scroll right down to the bottom and click the Amazon tab. There's also a support UCY tab at the top that you can donate. And check out all the other great broadcasts here on ucy.tv. Don't forget, when you're prepping gold, silver, good thing to have. If you go to antityrannynews.com/metal tech, check out Amagi Metals, one of my number one sources for precious metals. Great prices. And again, this broadcast gets a little kickback from that without affecting your price. And they have really, really good prices at Amagi Metals. So go check them out, antityrannynews.com/metal. And then also, again, UCY.tv, either that support UCY tab or the Amazon tab, shop through Amazon and UCY.tv. And that helps us broadcast and the others here on UCY.tv. And stay tuned. Great broadcast coming up after this. Thank you all for tuning in and have a great weekend. Try to live free and, again, spread the message and spread love and understanding. Take care.